Behind the morbid thrill of watching horror movies is usually the reassuring thought that they did not really happen. However, these supernatural flicks are all based on real life events. Nightmare on Elm Street. Wes Craven's 1984 slasher film centres around a sadistic, shape-shifting perpetrator who targets his prey while they're asleep. The horrific scenario of innocents being slain in their slumbering state was based on a mysterious and still unexplained phenomenon plaguing a particular group of people at the time. Craven later disclosed that the film owed its basic plotline to several newspaper articles from the Los Angeles Times during the 1970s about apparently healthy young Southeast Asian refugees who were passing away in their sleep. Craven later said that he was inspired to create the Dream Killer after he found the first article about a Cambodian family who had migrated to America to escape the mass genocide in their country. They had settled well there until the teenage boy in the family became terrified to sleep because of fear that if he slept, he would be slain by something chasing him. He would force himself to stay awake for days on end, but eventually passed away in the middle of a nightmare. This frightening phenomenon became the basis for A Nightmare on Elm Street. Many other male Hmong refugees started refusing to sleep because of the nightmares which they feared would lead to death. Having fled to the United States after enduring war and witnessing genocide in Laos, Cambodia and Vietnam, the traumatised survivors were suffering sleep disturbances and nightmares which caused them to avoid sleep. Between 1978 and 1981, 13 nocturnal deaths of Hmong men in Laos had been recorded. In the US, a total of 26 men passed in their sleep in 1981, with the condition seeming to afflict men aged between 19 and 30 years of age. It became known as the sudden unexplained nocturnal death syndrome. While many sufferers were found deceased, if medics arrived in time, the men were discovered with their hearts contracting abnormally fast. There was much speculation on the cause of the condition, with some doctors suspecting poor diet in the killing fields or exposure to chemical nerve agents during the Vietnam War, but one medical examiner queried why those factors would affect only men, and only during a specific nocturnal time frame. Some in the Hmong community believed they were being punished by spirits for deserting their homelands. This strange phenomenon is still medically unexplained to this day, and why in the film was a spectral villain named Freddy Krueger. Craven later related that his own adolescent experiences caused him to choose the name. As a child, he had been bullied at school by another boy named Fred Krueger. Deliver Us from Evil. The film Deliver Us from Evil is derived from the real-life accounts of NYPD Sergeant Ralph Sarchi, with the main character, played by Eric Bana, an actual demonologist. The 2014 film was inspired by the true-to-life figure of Sarchi and his experiences as described in his non-fiction memoir, Beware the Night. This records the grisly details of paranormal cases he handled during his career. His character is portrayed accurately in the film, revealing his spiritual work as both a police officer and demonologist, aligning with his personal mission of combating demonic forces. The NYPD Special Ops Sergeant worked in the 46th Precinct in the South Bronx neighbourhood of New York for almost 2 decades before retiring in 2004. As in the movie, Sarchi was not religiously devout growing up, but in his book describes how he became more drawn to Christianity after marrying and eventually began studying demonology after hours. While the now devout Roman Catholic states that his work as a police officer and a demonologist slightly overlapped, it wasn't until after he retired that he fully devoted his time to his exorcism work. Describing himself as a committed Christian in his writing, he claims that his mission is to, quote, bust the devil and his demons, relating both his police and exorcism work to that undertaking. In his role of demonologist, Saatchi claims to have undertaken 25 exorcisms and hundreds of house exorcisms. Videotapes he kept of these rituals were viewed by the film's writer-director Scott Derrickson, who described them as horrifying. Saatchi's book also emphasises that his spiritual work is a calling and that he has never charged any recipient for his efforts. While a strong and practical sergeant, he described himself as completely anti-science in his spiritual endeavours, ridiculing parapsychologists for their use of technology rather than holy water and relics. While Saatchi's character is the most accurate and true-to-life portrayal in the film, the persona of Father Mendoza was inspired by two prominent priest exorcists who were both Saatchi's mentors. Many elements were taken from Saatchi's cases and subtly inserted into the storyline, although he has conceded that ultimately the film is a work of fiction based on aspects of his cases and life. The reference to Saatchi's so-called radar in the movie was based on an instinctive awareness the sergeant experienced every time an evil presence was nearby. The real-life Saatchi did get a splitting headache in his forehead whenever he spiritually sensed a malevolent being close to hand. In the film, this radar enables him to identify calls that would prove more edgy and dangerous for the benefit of his thrill-seeking partner Butler, played by Joel McHale. There were other slight variations on the reality. Saatchi did not dispatch a child assaulter in cold blood, his daughter's stuffed owl was not possessed, and he apparently also had a connection to the infamous Warrens. The Birds. Despite initial inspiration from a short story by Daphne du Maurier entitled The Birds, Alfred Hitchcock's 1963 film The Birds was reportedly based around real-life events. These involved a bizarre and alarming incident that occurred only a few miles from Hitchcock's home in California, a mass bird attack on the seaside town of Capitola. On August 18, 1961, Capitola residents were said to have awoken to a scene that seemed straight out of a horror movie. Huge flocks of seabirds were crazily dive-bombing their homes, crashing into cars and spewing out half-digested anchovies onto their lawns. Alfred Hitchcock heard about this strange occurrence and used it as research material for this film, which was by then in progress. The actual cause of the birds' demented behaviour was toxic algae, which they had inadvertently ingested as part of their food consumption. However, this was not known back in the 1960s. In the film, the characters make reference to a similar bird attack, which they say occurred last year in Santa Cruz. This is an implied reference to the Capitola attack. It took the next 40 years of random events before researchers discovered the actual cause of these seeming attacks by disoriented seabirds. In 1987, 4 people perished and 100 were hospitalised on Prince Edward Island in Canada after eating mussels. Then, in 1991, several animal stranding events were reported in Southern California. The events were found to be connected when Louisiana State University researchers examining the contents of animal stomachs found toxin-producing algae that caused amnesia, disorientation, and seizures. The connection between the algae consumed by the victims of the events in 1991 and 1987 led them to believe that the algae was also responsible for the original 1961 incident. One of the oceanic researchers was Sibel Bargu, who had a special connection to the Birds movie. As a child, she remembers it screening on TV, but her parents did not allow her to watch it. However, she did manage to catch a lot of the action through the keyhole from outside of the family room. What she saw really scared her, but when she later became an oceanographer and Hitchcock fan, she was super excited to start work on algal blooms and their toxins because of the eerie link-up. Thus was solved the chilling mystery of the birds, while still leaving the audience with that thrill of horror.